Hello and welcome to WVU Medicine Tuesday Talks. I'm your host, Mary Ravazio Menard. With an estimated 95% of teens between 13 and 17 years old using social media, U.S. Surgeon General Vivek Murthy recently warned that widespread social media use among kids and teens poses a significant mental health risk that needs to be addressed immediately. And while acknowledging that social media can have some positive effects, the Surgeon General's report says that social media use in kids and teens can lead to or exacerbate eating disorders, low self-esteem, and depression. So what should we be doing as parents and caregivers? What should we do to reduce negative effects for kids and teens? We'll answer those questions and more as we're talking with Dr. Jonathan Pearl, a clinical child and adolescent psychologist at the WVU Rockefeller Neuroscience Institute. Welcome, Dr. Pearl, to Tuesday Talks.
Thank you very much. Thanks for having me.
We're happy to have you here. If you have any questions about social media and mental health for Dr. Pearl, just write them in the comments section below and we'll try to answer them live. All right. So we talked here in the intro about, the negative effects that the Surgeon General is talking about. But before we go there, let's talk about the positive effects of social media use, because there are some.
Absolutely. No, I think that's a very, very good point. I think something that's really important to consider is that social media is what you make out of it. It's not inherently good or bad. It's how people use it that bring out maybe some of the problems they're discussing in the report. So when it comes to the positives, really the biggest thing is spreading good information. There is the potential for spreading what we call evidence-informed information, rooted in the science, to spread information, whether that's healthcare, whether that's media, whatever it might be. It really has the potential to reach people who may not be as open to reading the books and the scientific articles. They get boring sometimes. So It's really a bit of a summary. And I think that when you look at the social media presence, we've seen healthcare organizations getting more and more involved. The American Medical Association, the American Psychological and Psychiatric Associations, and the list goes on and on. They've found ways to reach the average person, and it's as easy as hitting the share button or posting on a thread and being able to get this information out there. And when you look at some of the research, you see that we're reaching a wide range of people internationally. I think also when you look at what it has the potential to do, you see a lot of people who might have felt marginalized or underserved or underprivileged. We're having these connections where some didn't exist before. I mean, the biggest...
You're not alone.
You're not alone. And when you have some groups that really have felt kind of suppressed and pushed down, think LGBTQIA, think people with genetic conditions or healthcare conditions feeling like maybe it's just only me. It does allow an outlet for these people to be able to reach each other, to share good information. Again, we'll come back to the negative.
Yeah. Okay.
But it has the potential to share good information, to share resources. And when we have some of these conditions that really are rare, or we have people who just feel like they're in a community that is not supportive, it can make the world of difference and help with self-esteem. It can help reduce that feeling of loneliness or sadness, or even if we get to the clinical side, the depression, anxiety.
Yeah. Interesting way to look at it, Okay, so that's the positive. Now we're going to have to talk about the negative too. Do you agree with the Surgeon General's report that widespread social media use poses a significant mental health risk that we need to address right now?
Absolutely. The short answer is absolutely. I think we've known for quite a while that social media has the potential, and I should say potential, to create some negative impacts. The problem is when it comes to research and science and study, it takes a while to kind of figure out the details, the logistics of it. What the Surgeon General said is 100% true. The problem with social media is, again, how it's used. When we're using it the way that people use it, it has the potential to spread a lot of misinformation. And not just talking healthcare, just talking about misinformation about other people. We have gossip. The issue is that when we're talking about kids and adolescents, they are at a very susceptible age to peer influence. And when I say peer influence, that could be family, friends, the cool kid at school, celebrities, athletes. And you just see that the amount of information out there is not generally always great. You see information being posted indiscriminately as far as science and, like I said, media and gossip and just the whole 9 yards, really. The issue is that when you're susceptible and you continually see this, kids are not usually equipped to understand what's real and what's not. So with AI bots and chat bots and Photoshop and video, how are you supposed to know what's real, and how is a 12-year-old supposed to know what's real when they take it at face value? This is not a knock on, like, sometimes I hear, well, my kid's smarter than that, or my kiddo is they don't feed into that. Well, again, I'm not talking about individuals. I'm talking about on average, when you look at the research and what we see in clinic, we see it come up more and more. It has nothing to do with intelligence.
I believe that.
And the issue is that when we have this repeated exposure, and again, it could be misinformation, it could be hate speech, it could be adult content. As you said earlier, it leads to a range of issues, just general stress. You mentioned eating disorders, anxiety, depression. The repeated exposure also normalizes it. And the problem is that the more you feed into it, the more you read about it, especially if I think this person is respectable, for good or bad, right?
Right.
I start to internalize it a little bit. And I start to believe that, or I might look more into it. And the thing is, if we don't know what is legitimate or what's not, that has the potential to have significant influences on the kiddos kind of into the future.
And of course, kids and teens are more vulnerable to
Exactly.
that than adults can be vulnerable too. But,
Right.
But you think of that age group, they don't stand a chance. It's terrible. Well, there's help though too, right? I know. So, you're a clinical child and adolescent psychologist. So, what kind of effects has social media use had on some of your patients? What are you seeing specifically?
I think it's honestly a two-sided coin. I think that, going back to the positives for a moment, I think for some of the kids I work with, it has the potential to help build self-esteem. For example, I have some kids who are artists. They get to post some of their artwork and get positive feedback. Is it always positive? Of course not. No. But they do get positive feedback. They can share information. And like I said, some of the kiddos I work with have some very rare genetic conditions. They have medical conditions, and they just, I guess that's genetic, but they have conditions that are not necessarily well studied or well understood, and there's pockets around the country at different trial sites, so it's able to link those people. So that's the positive.
Right.
On the negative side, I'd be lying if I said it wasn't a little bit more negative. So we have a lot of kiddos come in with mood issues, meaning potentially sadness, crankiness, just that depression. Lots of kids worried about what people may post, or I went out with so-and-so, they're making up lies about me. You have people who were sending images back and forth or videos and then potentially posting them and sharing them without permission, which is, I think, a whole different discussion, but it does happen on social media. So really and truly, some of the things we talked about with the anxiety, the depression, the eating, and just forgetting the pathology, we see a lot of kiddos coming in with just general worry about the what if that may happen with it, and their self-esteem, their self-worth starts to take a hit.
How do you help a child or a teenager deal with things like that?
It is a very complicated question that varies by the kiddo. It depends on what they're coming in for, what their age is, as well as what their developmental age is. So sometimes we have kiddos come in with, say, autism spectrum or ADHD, and they might have some cognitive issues along with it, so we have to tailor what we do.
Right.
In short, without going into too much detail, because we've already spent like 2 hours talking about that alone, I think it's important to figure out the root of what the issue is. Like, what is it about it that's making you upset? Is it that someone's sharing something? Is it the fear of the unknown? Is it the what if scenarios? Is it that I'm sad? Is it really social media? Or am I posting on social media because something that's happening in my life, I just have a negative view of, like, myself, the world, the future? So is it the chicken or the egg? Is social media the cause, or just kind of the side effect of what's going on to the individual person? And that's why part of, like, my job is to do my best anyway, not to jump to conclusions about what brings people in, try to get at the nitty gritty, because we don't want to put a Band-Aid on something that needs stitches, so to speak.
Oh, yeah. So what age would you recommend a child or teen be allowed to use social media?
I think that's a great question that does not have an answer. I think that when you look...
I had to ask it, though.
That's fair. It is a fair question. We get it a lot. The problem is that when you look at the literature, there really isn't an age. There really isn't a specific of like 12 is the age or 13 is the age, because you have chronological age, like how old they are, and then you have developmental age, maturity level. So this might sound weird, but the philosophy I take is it's going to happen anyway. So it's not a matter of age, it's a matter of kind of equipping the kids and the families with the information they need to be able to be successful. I think in today's day and age, and for good or bad, the problem is that assuming kids are not having access because parents go, well, you're too young, is a little naive sometimes. I go to my friend's house at school, let's call it what it is. I work with 4-year-olds who have their own cell phones. Yeah. So, it's one of those things of it's not a matter of what age, it's becoming earlier and earlier and earlier. However, going back to the age question, I think we have to be careful about what they have access to. Should they have a Facebook or a TikTok at 4, 5, 6? Well, the problem is that not only are they posting stuff, it's stored forever. So we don't want something that's going to cause them issues. So, like I said, I don't think there's a specific age. However, older is definitely better if they can understand the repercussions, but I'd be lying if I said that adolescents and teenagers really understand long-term impacts.
Right.
So I think it's just a matter of monitoring and making sure they're as safe as possible so that if they're going to use it or when they're going to use it, they're, as like I said, as safe for now and in the future.
Well, what about parents that are saying, well, I want to wait till, my son's 13 or whatever, and really, like you said, or 30. How do parents deal with the fact that, okay, I want my son to wait till he's, 13, but, all of their friends are using social media at, I know I'm underestimating this, 10, I'm not an expert, but I mean, you just can't shield them.
You can't, and again, going back to kind of my original statement when we first started, is that just think about it. If I'm the only kid in school who's not on social media, I might be excluded from things. I'm not saying that's right or wrong, but I'm saying we have kids coming to clinic all the time. My mom says no, or my dad says no. I'm not invited to things. I'm missing out on postings. I'm missing out on things. It's the same argument with video games of it's about moderation, limiting. In other words, if I'm the only kiddo on the block, so to speak, who isn't allowed to do these things from a socialization standpoint, in other words, from like getting along with people, having these discussions, unfortunately, it does tend to create, it's a double-edged sword. It creates some level of issues. But like most things in life, it's about moderation. So in other words, as far as the parent who says absolutely no, I think that's their choice. I think as a parent, that's a decision that they have to make, as long as they're considering both the pros and cons of that, as long as they make a reasonable decision and stick with it. I think that's their parenting choice. However, I think that, again, going back to what's real life nowadays, I think we have to realize that electronics and media, and especially social media, has become more of a way of life. It's not a matter of, it has. I always joke it's a privilege in treatment, but the thing is that kids have come to expect it. Parents have come to expect it. So my philosophy, for right or wrong, is that it's gonna happen. So taking an all or nothing approach, a lot of the times when we see that, kids will find a way. Life will find a way. So I think that we have to be careful about the all or nothing approach, not because I'm saying parents are necessarily wrong, but the problem is, if we take that approach and kids are looking at it anyway, are they well prepared? Do they have the knowledge to be able to actually make sense out of it and be successful with it in the future?
Well, you're talking about moderation, but it's so big. How, as a parent, how do you wrap your arms around this and enforce limitations and monitoring of some kind? How do you do that?
I'd be lying if I said it was easy. I think that it depends on the family. I think it depends on the structure and how much electronics are offered and how much is used and what limitations you put on the kiddo to start with. So for example, I have some kiddos I work with who Facebook's okay, TikTok is not. Instagram is not, Reddit is not. So I think it depends on kind of what the limitations are. First things first, let's get the obvious out of the way. Parental locks, kind of helpful, not really. When there's a will, there's a way.
Yeah.
So I think the biggest thing that parents can do is really educate the kids. Teach them not just, digital literacy, basically, understanding how to make sense out of what you're reading, what you look at. So for example, understanding not everything you see is real. Like I'm not on Facebook as much anymore, but when I do and I look at it, I go, wow, my life's awful. Like, look at all my friends at parties.
Everybody's so happy.
Everyone's so happy. But the thing is, they're only posting very specific snapshots of their life. And on top of that, it's Photoshop.
Yeah,
so I think that you have to educate them on kind of what they're looking at. I think putting limits on it. So in other words, if it's going to happen, putting limits. We know higher social media use, more frequent use, longer use, is associated with those higher rates of anxiety, mood issues, stress. So I think limiting it is very important. I think having those discussions on like, what were you looking at? How did it go? And leaving the door open to having discussions like, what did you see? Any questions? Now, again, are adolescents going to come running to the parent to have these discussions? Of course not. But there are some, especially the kids I work with, part of treatment is opening some of that communication because they go to their friends who are equally as misinformed.
Yes.
And then we can spread some of the positive information. And honestly, sometimes the kids even become the model, which leads me to the second thing of, I think, assertiveness training to a certain degree and not giving in to some of that pressure. Because again, they're a little bit more susceptible. That is super easy for me to say, and most people are probably rolling their eyes of like, good luck. But that is something we work on. It's saying, explain to people that like, I don't know if I agree with this, and I don't know if I buy into this, or I don't think I should, and just being able to say no without feeling you're going to lose your friends, so to speak, is a monumental skill.
Yeah, it is.
And then honestly, parents modeling, I hate to say that. I know parents don't like when I say that, but if a parent is on their phone 24/7, it's hard to tell the kid not to. Do as I say, not as I do is not a good parenting tactic all the time.
No, none of the time, really.
I'm being nice,
So, do you recommend things like tech-free zones at dinner or before bedtime, or?
I do. I think it's a good
first tell us exactly what a tech-free zone is.
A tech-free zone is exactly what it sounds like, where basically you have designated times or locations, such as a living room or dining room table, or between 5 and 6, which is dinner, or 30 minutes before bed, where it's tech-free zones. No phone, no tablet, no electronics. Some parents go as far as to kill the Wi-Fi. Might be more than most parents are willing to do, but it's possible. My philosophy, and that's supported by the literature, is moderation. In other words, I take it as a reality that kids and adolescents and teens are going to be using electronics. They're going to be using social media to an extent. So how do we balance it out with real life communication? So I do think that at dinner time, people don't need to be staring at their phones. I am equally as guilty, I will say that. But I think that having some tech-free zones can encourage discussion, communication. It can encourage discussion on maybe even what you saw on social media, like what was some of the stuff you read? What do you think about that?
Right.
Before bed, we know that electronic use, social media or otherwise, is associated with poorer sleep. Poorer sleep means higher rates of issues, including tiredness. We see a lot of kids come in for ADHD assessments where really, I would say about a third of the kids, we just need to fix sleep. Like it's not actually ADHD.
Okay.
However, if you are prone to a mood problem or anxiety or something like that, and you're not getting enough sleep, it could actually make it a little bit worse over time. It can get you a little bit more keyed up. So I am in favor of them. We talk about them all the time as long as it's moderation. It's not all or nothing. It's 30 to 60 minutes before bed, we cut all electronic use. We do something relaxing. Dinner time, I think, is okay. And then first thing in the morning, we don't need to roll over and go right to our phone.
Turn on your phone.
And especially in the middle of the night, I think that tech-free zones when you're sleeping, we know that light, blue light and all that stuff, we know it's not a great thing when you wake up at 2 a.m. and your phone beeped and you look at it and then you have trouble going back to sleep.
Oh, yeah. Been there, done that. What do you do, though, if you suspect your child is being bullied on social media? That seems like a really tough one.
That has been increasing over the last couple decades. Cyberbullying is a huge thing because The biggest differential between regular bullying and cyberbullying is that anonymity. It's that I can make a fake account and I can just do whatever I want. I think that we have to keep track. Kids are using this. So I think when we suspect they're being bullied, I think the first thing is just don't sweep it under the rug, don't assume, and we hear all the time, they'll be fine. Yes, maybe, but prevention is the best medicine. Yeah. So I think that keeping an eye out for changes in eating or sleeping or interests or just being really keyed up, their phone goes, oh my God, I have to check it. I think that's really, really important just to monitor. If we suspect there is some bullying going on, it sounds very, very stupid, but I cannot tell you how many people I've had come in and I say, have you guys talked about it? Have you ever asked the kid?
Ask them right now.
That's why we're here. So just asking sometimes can be enough to get the ball rolling. Now, whether they need extra help or not, that's why we exist. But a lot of the everyday issues can just be addressed by having that conversation on what's getting you down, what happened. And really and truly, cyberbullying has become more and more of a legal problem and a more of a national issue. And there have been repercussions in different states and different laws regarding cyberbullying. And again, I think that's a little bit too much to go into right now, but I think that it has become so in the news that even internationally, England, other places are having these regulations being introduced and legislation introduced and consequences put into place, whether it's federally, in the school, statewide, whatever. There's increasing recognition of it and there's increasing consequences of it, especially when we see all these sad news in the report that cyberbullying led to a suicide or it led to those kind of things. So there's becoming more and more of a drive to have consequences for it to protect people.
Okay. So can you talk a little bit about the team of experts at the Rockefeller Neuroscience Institute that are helping parents and teens deal with mental issues like this? And
absolutely. No, we like to think we're quite good.
I think you are too.
Thank you. No, joking aside, we have an excellent team out there. We have psychologists, psychiatrists, social workers. We all work together to not just assess the kiddo, but also on the mental health side to provide treatments, whether that's pharmacological, so the medicines, and or the therapies. Oftentimes we know whether it's anxiety, depression, eating, self-esteem, we know oftentimes they work well together. So a lot of us out there are child adolescent focused, specialized. So we have specialized training in the techniques, not just to assess the kiddo, but also, like I said, to treat. And I think that's an important distinction, not because other people can't do it. But the thing is getting kids to open up, getting adolescents and teenagers to come in and open up. Well, it was that easy, they wouldn't be coming to see me. Like I was a parent would just say, hey, what's the problem? And they would pour their heart out. So part of what we do is also build that trust, build that rapport, help them be able to communicate as well as address their issues. And that's kind of what we like to believe we're pretty good at, because again, we're taking an evidence-based approach. We're using the science and what we know that is best to be able to help kiddos in these situations, as well as families. We don't work in a bubble. We talk about home, we talk about public, we talk about school, we talk about grandparents, aunts, uncles. We try to include the broader scope. Friends, we try to include everything to make sure that we are helping as best as we can and we're working as a team.
So before we go, what's the most important thing you want our viewers to know about the effects of social media on mental health?
I think the takeaway message is moderation. I think it's monitoring the kiddo, keeping an eye out for any changes from the norm, teenage hormones aside. So changes in eating, sleeping, interests, mood, withdrawal, staying by themselves, just avoiding going out with people. I think monitoring is very important. The tech-free zones can be helpful if a parent is not interested in that. I still think that having that discussion, equipping the kid with information, whether that's coming from them, a friend, the school, me, you, I think that having the information can be vital, because we assume, adolescents are able to do, to take up the information. The problem is that assumes they're taking in the right kind of information. And I think the takeaway message is not to assume anything. Don't assume everything is honky-dory. Don't assume everything's perfect. There are ways to prevent it. There's ways to reach out, to have that communication. And really, it's also a way for parents and kids to build that trust, to be able to make sure that it's not just social media. We can talk about other things as well, which will be very helpful as they become more of an adult.
Great. Well, thank you so much for sharing this
Absolutely.
information. I mean, it is a really important topic, and it's just so big, you know, and we thank you for sharing your knowledge with us today.
Of course.
Well, that brings us to the end of this edition of Tuesday Talks. If you're looking for more information on mental health issues, visit wvumedicine.org/RNI. Join us for the next Tuesday Talks on September 5th when we'll talk about autism with Dr. Jenna Wallace, a pediatric psychologist at the WVU Medicine Children's Neurodevelopmental Center. I'm Mary Ravazio Menard, and on behalf of Dr. Pearl and everyone at WVU Medicine, thanks for joining us and have a great day.